the thing to take away is still software. It's easy to break. That if you are building or using AI, take a step back and say, do I understand the risks of using it? Do I have ways to evidence those risks? If I don't, I should probably call someone up and try to get a handle on this.
Welcome to Unspoken Security, the raw and gritty podcast for security professionals who are looking to understand the most important issues related to making the world a safer place, including intelligence-driven security, risks and threats in the digital and physical world, and discussions related to corporate culture, leadership, and how world events impact all of us on and off our keyboards. In each episode, host AJ Nash engages with a range of industry experts to dissect current trends, share practical insights, and address the blunt truths surrounding all aspects of the security industry.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unspoken Security. I'm your host, AJ Nash. I spent 19 years in the intelligence community, mostly at NSA. Been building and maturing intelligence programs in the private sector for about 9 years now. And I'm passionate about intelligence, security, public speaking, mentoring, and teaching. I also have a master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga University. Go Zags. And I continue to be deeply committed to servant leadership. This podcast brings all of these elements together with some incredible guests to have authentic, unfiltered conversations on a wide range of challenging topics. It's not your typical podcast. It's not all polished necessarily. My dog makes occasional appearances. People argue and debate. We even swear here. I've certainly been known to. That's all okay. Think of this as the podcast. It's more like a conversation that you'd overhear at a bar after a long day at one of the larger cybersecurity conferences. These are the conversations we usually have when nobody's listening. Now, today I'm joined by Dr. Peter Garraghan, CEO and CTO of Mindgard. He's also the professor in computer science at Lancaster University and fellow of the UK Engineering Physical Sciences and Research Council. He's an internationally recognized expert in AI security who's been dedicated for years to the scientific and engineering expertise. He's been putting that towards creating bleeding edge technology to understand and overcome growing threats against AI. So obviously AI, a huge topic. Everybody wants to talk about it. And so do I, as it turns out. So Peter, anything you want to add to that resume?
Nope, I think you summarize it quite well.
All right. Peter's a man of few words, which is going to make it a tough radio broadcast. No, we'll be fine when we get into it, though. I'll tell you, today's topic, as you might imagine with Peter's background, is going to be about AI. The discussion today actually is entitled, Can My AI Be Hacked? And so this is interesting. Like I said, everybody's talking about AI right now. AI is in everything, right? It's in our phones, it's in our computers, it's in our workspaces. Everybody's trying to do something with AI. They're going to get rid of people, or they're going to make them more efficient, or a little bit of both, perhaps. But I don't think a lot of people are talking about the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses associated with this. I think I've seen a lot of people that are very quick to jump in and they play with some of these platforms and they're amazed at the output and they're just all in on it. They're sold on it. Oh my goodness, I needed a thing. I asked it to write it and it wrote this thing and it's amazing. And they don't really take a lot of time to consider how much we are offloading our thinking, our production, our authenticity to these platforms because, typically, humans are biased towards being lazy. That's just who we are. We want the most efficient, effective things. That's evolution, right? So I think there's a need to have this conversation about whether AI can be hacked. And obviously, Peter's the right person for that discussion. So let's jump right into this, Peter. First, let's talk about what do you see as the biggest risks with AI today? And maybe that means talking about where we came from to better understand how we got here.
Sure. I think to your first question about the biggest risks, to be very succinct, the type of risks you see within AI are just serious other type of risks in software. The problem here is that people don't understand as well as they should. The second one is people have a habit of anthropomorphizing AI. And what that ends up happening is that they're conflating big societal shifts of technology, and they actually are important, like you said, workforce displacement, disinformation, but actually close to the ground in terms of what are the actual risks we're actually seeing in terms of technology. And as you mentioned, maybe to give an idea of some history about AI, and again, I like cutting through hype in this technology. I hear a lot in marketing what AI means. So AI has been around for a long, long time. It's not a new technology. When people talk about AI nowadays, they're talking about a particular type of machine learning architecture. It's called the transformer architecture. Transformer architecture was derived a mechanism called the attention mechanism back in 2017. A paper came out. But if we step back to the very beginning, we've been using it for many years and it's been in software for a long time. But the problem with new technology comes out, new tech New innovation results in new type of risks. So let's start with another technology that's not AI. Let's think of virtualization. Virtualization, you would argue, is underpinned due to cloud computing is underpinned by virtualization technology. I'm not denying this. Virtualization has been around for a long, long time. It's like from the 60s. It was kind of from the mainframes that you saw. But the problem is then memory was really expensive. You had like a few megabytes maximum if you're lucky. And okay, that's interesting. Didn't have much use then beyond the other type of benefits. It wasn't until the x86 architecture was virtualized and then really became cheap enough that like a spark happened and say, oh, now I can spin up all these machines, like I have multiple physical machines of one physical machine. And that kind of coincided with a market into the cloud computing formed. And then, yes, it's now a very, very high quality market. What happened on that journey is two things. One is I remember back when cloud was really hitting its stride, people were claiming it could do absolutely everything. And when it happened, that was not the case. It does so few things very, very well, and each of those things is worth a lot of money. But also, it introduced a new type of threat surface in terms of people to understand these type of things. So that kind of it's multiple decades to get where we are with cloud computing. Let's look at AI in its modern form. The artificial neural network as a concept is a few decades old. It's not a new concept. It wasn't in 2014 that the deep neural networks, which is a particular type of artificial neural network, started out competing other types of machine learning in general purpose tasks. And in 2017, when these potentials all you need paper came out, and then it triggered things like large language model, open source, Spanish models, agent. We're going to agents and all that sort of stuff at some point. But again, long time from conception to actually pick up a market. We're now in the phase of people claiming to do absolutely everything, and that is not the case. It specializes in certain things, and eventually they'll become big, lots of very valuable segments of the market technology-wise. But we're also seeing here is that we are seeing threats manifesting from these new type of technology in that space. So time's a flat circle. Anytime new tech comes out, there's a long time from conception to adoption. People claim to do the entire world. That's not the case. But when it gets adopted and it gets ubiquitous and pervasive, you have a threat of that manifest in this type of area.
Yeah, well, and first of all, I think that's a great comparison. It's a great way of explaining it. I love the idea, by the way, that time is a flat circle. But it's a great way of explaining how these technologies happen, right? Cloud was a good example. I remember when cloud showed up, and cloud was going to be the answer to everything. And it's not. It's an answer to a few things, like you said, and it does those things really well. I worry that one of the differences here is this is straight to commercial, right? When cloud computing came out and cloud storage, most average people didn't even know about it or care about it. It was very, it was corporate based. I mean, the closest I had a home server I started, and that's sort of like having a personal cloud, which it wasn't a cloud, but it doesn't do the things that real cloud computing could do or anything like that. But most of it wasn't for private consumption, right? It was business to business. It was very corporate. Whereas these AI models, these LLMs and the AI technologies that are coming out, they're straight to people. Everybody I know pretty much right now has at least one, probably several, AI technologies on their phone, carried around everywhere they go, right? This so quickly moved directly into the market and directly to people. And it's built on most of these are built to be such people-friendly platforms. Anybody can do that. A child can interact with this system immediately, right? You don't have to write code. You don't have to understand it at all. A child can speak to it. They don't have to be able to type. They can speak, and this thing can respond to them. So I wonder if that doesn't add any complexities when we talk about some of these risks, compared to these other technologies, or if it doesn't change in your mind the timeline for how rapidly these things are happening, how rapidly they're going to get out into the world and be manifest everywhere, and therefore how much faster this risk surface, this threat surface grows as a result.
It's a good point. And I think it comes back to people have a habit of anthropomorphizing what is essentially probability and matrices to give me outputs. And with the new type of AI that we're thinking about now, it's very good at natural language processing. That's why again, not the history, but the transformer architecture was in the mix for a while. A lot of research were trying to figure out how to solve the problem with natural language processing. And it's a point where people combine its way of conveying information, input and output as natural language. It actually can trick us to think we're anthropomorphizing the way. So absolutely, the way we interface with the AI nowadays is through natural language more. We use AI for decades. No one obsessed about regression techniques when it was in everything. So regression is absolutely everything. People want saying, hey, this thing is transformative. That's not true. If you talk to data scientists and people in the back end say regression is actually amazing. Like this is great. So there's almost solutions. What it wasn't was a customer-facing natural language technique to convey information that human typically will understand. And hey, there's a whole research field about human-to-human interaction that tries to look at how we interface with machines. And and the use of AI in this space is one way to make that API much more freeform, as opposed to it must conform to this type of protocol, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I agree. And it's like, listen, I play around with these things, and we'll get into it. We got more questions that dig into this a little bit deeper. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I play around with these technologies. I know a lot of people that do. And to me, that's been the biggest difference I've seen, in this. I don't want to be somebody who's talking about either, the next big thing that revolutionizes, right? Crypto was going to revolutionize the world. And before that it was cloud. And there's always, a new buzzword coming out, right? And I don't want to jump on those trends. I also don't want to be somebody who thinks the sky is falling. This technology is going to ruin us. Once upon a time, rock and roll was going to end, society, I think, and computers it's not going to do that necessarily either. But it does seem that this one's different. And maybe it's the anthropomorphizing that you keep talking about here. The fact that this looks and feels like people. I mean, you can create custom bots that you can set it up to speak in a specific tone and however you want it to. I mean, you can create these things that'll either be very sassy if you want, or very arrogant, or very subservient, or they can speak with male or female voices. They can do all sorts of things. And I'm not excited about the future when you combine that with the advanced robotics. I'm not really looking forward to the sci-fi movies that are about to become reality for us. But it does, concern me a little bit, obviously, that this might be different than what we've seen before. But I think maybe getting into the next part of the conversation makes sense here, right? Because, the topic's about hacking. So when you say, when we say, can my AI be hacked? What do you mean by hacking AI?
When we think about AI, no matter what we try to hope it is, it's still software running on hardware that takes data inputs and data outputs. Any software has vulnerabilities inside it of any form. Even think about AI for a second. Just think of any software, any system that can change states. I'm not talking about computers. I'm talking about real physical systems as well, like building, and even social systems can fail, but also can be intentionally failed by some sort of nefarious actor in security. In this case, hacking AI in terms of, can I surface deliberately vulnerability within the AI itself that can lead to loss, damage, harm, or just unintended outputs which are damaging to whichever stakeholder cares about this. And again, going back to your concerns about the robotics and the power of such relationship, that stuff is, again, a big societal question about how these things. But I see that in a different atmosphere in terms of actually what is it. Think about it as empirically, it's still software, data, and hardware. And if you think about attacks against AI, and we'll talk about what that actually looks like, I haven't seen a novel attack in AI that you could not see in other type of software as an analogy. So what I mean by that is prompt injection and SQL injection from databases are good analogies, which what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to inject an instruction hidden within a legitimate user command to do other stuff. If I'm trying to bypass an intrusion detection system, I'm trying to bypass a guardrail, which is kind of like a firewall or a WAF of an AI system. In principle, it's kind of the same idea. If we're trying to leak data from a model and from a database, there's really good analogies in comparison to what I'm trying to achieve. There isn't necessarily any novel in what I'm trying to do, but how I do it is very, very different for a few reasons. One is, if you're talking about deep neural networks, normally if you did something like static SAST or static analysis security testing, I would like to look at the code and run some stuff. If I do it with a neural network, it's a bunch of matrices and numbers of probability. There is no natural language to actually do testing against. So that's very opaque. So, okay, that's not going to work. What can I do? The second one is, it's very stochastic, which means I can talk with the same input multiple times, different outputs. That's not good for security. Or even for hacking, that's great, because then I can do a whole bunch of stuff in terms of causing a whole bunch of risks against it, or like finding certain issues in it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It doesn't react the same way every time, right? I think that's a really good point, right? I mean, most things, if you're going to test the software, if I'm going to test a calculator, I put 1 plus 1 and it's 2, it's working. If I put 1 plus 1 and it's 4, it's not. It should give me the same output every time. I know this is super simplistic. You can tell I'm not a computer programmer, but it will give me the same output every time. And if it's not, I know it's not working properly. If I test an LLM and I ask it a question, it gives me an answer, and I ask it the same question, it gives me another answer, and I ask the same question, it gives me a third answer. They all might be the right answer too, or variations of a theme, or they all might be the wrong answer, by the way, or anything in between. So how do you test if the model is working the way it's supposed to, if it's giving you the output it is supposed to give, and if that output is true and valid, which I find to be the hardest part of this, which isn't necessarily tied to hacking. That's flaws in algorithms, a lot of things that go with that, but it also could be tied to hacking, right? Because I have fears. Listen, I'm an Intel guy. This is my background. And so, I've been in Intel for decades. And from day one, when I first showed up at NSA, I was told, enjoy it while it lasts. You're all going to be gone soon. And I was like, what are you talking about? We're going to get rid of all of you. Automation's going to replace all the Intel analysts. We're not going to need these tens of thousands of people. Enjoy the short ride you have. And, I have plenty of gray hair now. I didn't have then. So I've always said you're not going to replace Intel people. But people still want to, governments want to, companies want to. Intelligence analysts are expensive. And I look at this technology and think we're getting closer and closer to people trying to do that. And so I worry about poisoning the LLMs themselves, poisoning the models. So for instance, we talk a lot about bias in intelligence. And everybody I've ever worked with has worked with some analyst who had some bias somewhere. We all have some we have to fight against. But if you're in an office where there's one analyst, no matter what happens, he's always convinced it's China or Russia, use an example. And you can never get them off that bias. All of these things are going to be poisoned. You'll have other people peer review it and validate it, but it's one person. If we rely on these systems and somebody poisons the system, everything is poisoned, everything is biased, and there is no way to check on that. And are these things I should be worried about? Am I overthinking it, or is this part of the discussion about hacking the AI and making these things challenging for us to get the right answers out of?
I think the easiest way to think about this is replace the word AI with any other technology or application, which is, should I worry about my AI being poisoned? Is the same question as, should I worry about my database being poisoned? Yeah.
So yes.
The answer is yes. It's not a new problem in this space, but what is different is how you might want to do this, how it can be detected, and how do you mitigate against this space. And again, even go back to basic principles, which is one of the problems I see in the AI space is people aren't applying even rudimentary thinking of security principles to when they deploy AI. So they're just saying, hey, I got ChatGPT, I got open source model, put it live, great. It's online, isn't it? Great, wonderful. If I was in an organization and I did that for any other tool, say, absolutely not. What are you doing? We have controls in place. We have to follow a process. Why have you done any testing? So, of course I have. Due to, again, it's an idea to people anthropomorphize that thinks, it seems fine. It's acting the way it should do. And it typically has come from the data science teams, certainly not from the typical app developer teams who have a lot of scrutiny on tons of from the security teams. You end up in those scenarios, actually, yes, you put the thing live and you have a piece of software that's gone live that hasn't had the functional properties of the system being tested and validated. And I can talk about information truth, and that's a whole different topic about hallucinations. And maybe a quick side point: all LLMs hallucinate. Everything's a hallucination, okay? Because LLMs do not have ontological knowledge of the ground truth of their data. That is the reality. They're figuring out predicting the next tokens, the words with relation. Again, that's a super simple way to look at it. But the main thing is that it's no grounding for truth, really. So a hallucination can imply this thing is making it up. In some cases that it's making it up in things that I have tried to poke it toward, which is true, versus things that are not true, which I flag as problematic. So taking that as an example, hallucinations could be a functional problem, which is my performance of my model is not good enough in that case, because no ontological mapping of actual truth and knowledge. I should think about that better. Could also be that a data scientist has built a medical chatbot and they're not a practitioner, they're not a medical person. So how on earth do you know it's actually correct? All the way down to, let's think of a security problem in this case is, if I'm using a AI to generate code for me, my code is quite popular. If it hallucinates an NPM package, that's annoying. But if I really made it so the NPM package is legitimate, when I say legitimate, is that I, as an attacker, have made a package of this name that you can connect to, and it downloads it, and basically, I can run whatever I want the system. That becomes a risk, as opposed to a functional problem of the system now because of knowledge of the problem of the system itself. So that's just kind of one slice. But again, it's like also asking, is AI risk? Yes. The same as what's the risk in software applications? The answer is it's infinite and we'll focus on.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because what you talked about there are two different, kinds of, several, but two different kinds of risk, in that Is it programmed poorly because the person who programmed it didn't know what they were doing? Is there, well, I shouldn't say didn't know what they're doing, but didn't know the content, right? So they weren't able to feed the machine. It's, we've been saying this forever, garbage in, garbage out, right? These machines have to be taught. They have to go off of real data. So if you teach it, things that aren't real, training data, a lot of times, it's fine. I'm a little concerned that I don't know if I've ever seen, with the exception, maybe Microsoft makes a habit of this, but I don't know if I've ever seen any other technology that so quickly went to market, which was clearly not fully baked. Like, I've spent a fair amount of time in some of these systems, and you get answers, and you get, you'll ask it to give you a short paper on a topic, and you'll get what appears to be a very impressive paper and all the sources and everything. And then you look, none of the sources are real. They're completely fiction. And I've interrogated these systems and finally gotten them to cough up the answers on why. I mean, the good news is if you interrogate them, they tend to tell you how they're created at some point, if you know to ask the right questions. And I've had it finally go, oh no, I don't. I have a live web tool that's not actually a live web tool. We call it that, but I don't actually go to the internet and get live. I can't browse the internet. I've got I've got training data that's 3 years old. I can go to the internet and I can pull links, but I can't read the stories. And so these were all fake sources because I looked at a previous link that was real, and I decided that the future link would probably look like that. So I wrote a new link with a new, from 2023, I made it 2025, whatever, but that doesn't actually exist. Right. Mm-hmm. And you start figuring that out. And that's a flaw, obviously, in maybe it's not a flaw. I shouldn't say that. It's design. It's just, it shouldn't be commercialized if it's design that is built that way so far. And people are just trusting these technologies, but that's completely different from the risk that you're talking about, the second piece, which is the malicious risk, the intent to cause harm, whether it's the intent to use the platform to deliver harm, to create harm, or the intent to, mislead the platform, teach it poorly, or set up, to manipulate the underlying data to create different answers, which are two very different things. I'm a little worried about both. And obviously, as a risk person, I'm sure you worry about both too, because risk is risk, whether it's malicious or whether it's, just in the design.
I think maybe 2 points going back to me. Well, the first thing I mentioned is about, well, how do you demonstrate value in a modern AI? There's a lot of silly money being thrown at this, and it's kind of normal advantage. So I give the example of a sieve. So you have a big sieve full of flour. I shake it, I get a piece at the end. What people are saying, hey, I can do absolutely everything. It's amazing. And as I shake the sieve, more and more use cases fall out the sieve, and I'm left with a few clumps, and each of those clumps is worth a lot of money, very valuable. So what is AI good at right now? It's good at translation and natural language stuff. It's really good at. And more specifically, LLMs are good at natural language activities. Makes sense. That's its genesis. Those are super valuable. So you got a combination of people say you can do absolutely everything, but actually it's very good at certain things like pattern matching and summarization and translation capabilities. It's much better at those things. And those would be very, very valuable, don't get me wrong. But now we're in kind of a scenario where it's doing everything and people are slapping you on different things, causes different risks because you're not following basic practices. That's kind of the first thing I would say about thinking about value in this space. And the second point about actual risks, there's so much marketing hype in this space. But if you sit down and think about what type of AI application do I have in my organization, how it's being used, what do I really care about in order to, and that's a very open question, because different applications have different type of use cases and different type of threats that you're going to care about in the space. So if I have a customer facing chatbot that is engaging people who are vulnerable, the type of threats that you need to identify and kind of address are completely different from another application. So the most common example in the space is how to build a bomb, how to build a Molotov cocktail.
Sure.
This is the most example of jailbreaking for safety guideline breaking. My personal take is that it's not interesting jailbreaking on that on alone, because I can go online and find information pretty quickly. Type Google, how do I build a bomb? I might get someone off on my door, find if that information is pretty available in that sort of space. But it also depends on the use case, which is, and then the third thing I should also mention, probably first, is I can block that really easily. I think you have some basic blocking or keywords in a bomb. Don't talk about that. And attackers get around that quite easily. That's probably the next conversation we'll have about how to get past these things. It's a combination of, yes, there are, one is relevant for my use case. So talking about bad topics to a vulnerable person publicly facing, yes, I probably care about those things. If I have a personal AI that generates code for me myself, and I'm not able to see it, I don't care about stuff. I have to prompt it myself to do it. But I probably care about other things that just give me bad code. So but first principle saying, I have AI, what are my use cases and what are the risks I care about, and how do I build things about that? I think maybe it's inspired another idea to help kind of pick the complexity of the spaces. The difference of AI compared to other software is normally when I build software or systems, I start with nothing. So I have an idea, I have the use case, functional properties. I start with one component of the system, what's great. Then I start adding more things and more capabilities over time. And as I'm doing this, I'm doing testing. I've got my threat models. I understand it because it's not that complicated. And eventually, as this will get bigger, the more likely it's to fail, the more likely I'm going to miss something in state change, of course, security problem. So you kind of get to the end. So that's how we built software for many, many years. Okay. With an AI, I'm dragging in this piece of software that can do a million different things. It can write poetry. It can write emails. It can do code. It can do translation. And that makes it quite difficult to think about risk, because if I was building software, I said, okay, I'm a developer. My job is to build an email application, but I also build these other capabilities that it can write songs and do poetry and do translation. You'll say, why do you spend time doing this? Because A, it's a waste of time, but B, you don't introduce a whole bunch of unknown, uncertain things in the system. You wouldn't do that. AI, you're pulling this big thing and only want like a small subset of this thing. That makes security of it and the risk quite problematic, because you're trying to constrain it now. Constraint means I can get around it if need be, versus in my other system, I'm starting with the bottom up to get it more complicated versus the top down from dragging capabilities together.
Well, right. Normally you build something, you have a requirements document, you figure out what it is you're trying to create. And as you said, you build an element and another element and another element. And whatever you haven't built isn't there. Right. Whereas in this case, it's like you had everything and now we're trying to chisel away the things we don't want and that doesn't work as well, at least from what I can see so far. Well, let's just say it creates more risk, as you said. I won't say it doesn't work as well. I'm not qualified to make that claim, but it certainly creates a lot more risk, because all the everything in theory is already in there. And then you've got users, because you release this thing to the world. And I don't mean you, obviously, we as a society in these businesses released all this to the world. And somewhere between people who are malicious or people who are curious, you've got, hackers, white hat hackers, to just the general public. I mean, people are going to play with tools like this, and you get all sorts of unintended consequences or all sorts of applications that haven't, as you said, haven't been tested, haven't been thought out thoroughly, in my opinion. I mean, I've heard stories that somebody told me the other day that they have a friend they know that uses their AI. I don't know which AI they're using or if they have a custom bot or not, but they're using AI as their personal therapist. I said, I would highly recommend that you tell her to stop doing that. And here's why. And I gave a bunch of information that I done research on. I said, this is a really bad idea. These aren't designed for this purpose. AI isn't designed to push back, for instance, which is something you're going to want in a therapist. A therapist who disagrees with you on everything is a real problem. If you're having hallucinations, they're going to go ahead and support your hallucinations and tell you you're brilliant. And this is the most creative thing that has ever come up before. And you'll go down this spiral of hallucinating and into this AI psychosis that I've been reading about. But it's an example of how quickly people are like, but again, because as you said, it's been anthropomorphized. So people think, well, I'm talking to it and it's answering me and it's a real conversation and it's pulling real information off the internet. And some of it's really valid. You can look it up. So it's a mixture of real and fantasy, and it's very confusing. But again, it's because it wasn't constrained by a requirements document, right? It wasn't saying we're going to build a piece of software to do a thing. I'll use the simplest example. I'm going to calculator. I'm going to build a piece of software that does mathematical calculations. It doesn't also teach me recipes for cooking, or as you said, write poetry. It isn't going to give me ideas and try to, create authoring new products from scratch, written products or something. And so there's all of this stuff's been mixed together and just thrown out into the world of the populace, but also into the business world. And so it's kind of a sidebar question, but I'll ask if you have thoughts on this. There's a big push to move this because there's productivity that goes along with it. And I've seen stories of people saying, well, we have programmers and we have 10 programmers, but now I can use one programmer in AI and then get rid of 9 people. And in for-profit industry, which is most of the world, there's a huge push towards this. I've heard the back and forth between whether AI won't replace you, but people who use AI will. If we have 10 programmers now with AI, we can do 100 people's worth of work, versus no, we have 10 programmers, we'll fire 9 and we'll keep one and the AI will do the rest. But I fear, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, again, in a lot of cases, it seems like it's not fully baked for all these use cases or tested out. And it seems like people are very quickly willing to hand over the reins, hand over the responsibility, hand over control to these technologies because of the profit margins that can come along with this and the value there. How dangerous is that? Are we getting to a point where we're going to be just people are selling garbage to other people and nothing's going to be real anymore? And it's all been just pushed off to systems that weren't designed to do this yet?
My hunch is that they will try and very quickly be pushed back. It's not driven value. Ultimately, if they're driven by value and ROI, the company that actually delivers good value on what they do is going to win in that space. So there's a big push for AI to be seen as high value to the company. people are still trying to figure out in their pilots and POCs, proven concepts in the enterprise, what actual use cases can I get real meaningful productivity gains that are sustainable. That's what the key, which is, yes.
Sustainable is a good point.
Yes, I can get it to work in this one context really well, but what happens when this happens and this happens and I have a different context? The whole thing might fall apart. So I work with, the ones that are using AI the most maturely and sensibly, is an augmentation tool, like any tool. Either a new tool comes out, it made my job quicker. What's AI good at? Automating laborious tasks, but also finding patterns that I could miss in that system. Yeah, that technology efficiency gains might result in teams changing size, but relying it entirely with no supervision on the technology that even the inventors themselves are saying that in benchmark it's great, but guess what? You've optimized benchmarks to get good scores. Again, leadership board mentality is a really bad way of delivering value because every organization is very, very different in this space. And again, when we talk about the societal impact of AI, I think it's really important to still think about what other type of risks am I seeing in AI itself. So I'll give you 3 examples of this because they're kind of close to home. I mean, really close to actually what's happening. So if I have, let's say, an LLM, that could be a model from a foundation model provider that I've hooked up to my system, or I've built my own open source. I have pulled an open source LLM into my application. That's great. There are 3 types of risks that you can classify that I might care about: security risks, safety risks, and business risks. Security risks are quite straightforward, which is one of the problems of large language models is that the data and control plane aren't the same. There's no separation. Anthropomorphize Google tried to separate it, and they haven't had any luck because that's really, really hard. What's happening is that you can hide instructions very easily. So I can actually hide OS command instructions in the instruction set. It'll return to me the terminal, the Linux, basically information from Linux, and I can do a execution attack on that system. That's a classic cybersecurity problems in terms of, yes, I can leverage the AI itself to call other tools that can let me on my hard run some stuff. And that can range from RCE, market injection attacks, cross-site scripting, direct leakage, OS command. There's a whole bunch of things you could do in that system. So the AI is, you're social engineering the AI to do these things, equivalent to like you're social engineering a person to do so. That's how security works. Security folks know this space quite well. What they don't understand too well is actually how do I do this thing in an AI space as opposed to my current tools. The second is, again, to give you an example of the security one of the most common problems I see, as I mentioned, is, well, I say to AI, what do you do? And I says, I can retrieve information. Great. And I then have strong confidence there's a database in this tool somewhere. That's good to know. And I figured out that, hey, this thing recognizes certain encoding technique. So I can translate some instructions to another instruction set. If I check there's a database, and I think it's probably a SQL database, if I know the tool chain can call this and I put data inside it, guess what? I can then make a payload that has a hidden SQL injection instruction attack to the tool and back again. Classic SQL injection in that case. So again, security, well understood conceptually in cybersecurity, I like to think, but in AI, it's quite a bit messy. That's kind of the first thing. Second one is safety. This is the most common one in research. You see a lot of adversarial machine learning and AI safety research about how do I stop you talking about controversial topics that might be bad for reputational damage, but also just topics it's not nice. Or also, how do I encourage harm, as you mentioned, in terms of the parasocial relationship, but also that's a big concern for certain use cases. And the third one, which is a little bit different, is business risk, which is IP theft is very well understood, but with an AI application, I can get it to tell me, how do I make my own products? Figure out how to make these things, or tell me which competitor should I go with compared to you if need be. And that should say, hey, I'm happy to tell you. So I could spend forever trying to do OS, market injection, OS injection, SQL injection, try to get the recipe out. Why just ask it, hey, I can manipulate to tell me these things, and then it'll give it to me very freely. So I'll give there's 3 different buckets of security teams I like to look at. And on my day-to-day of actually doing pen testing, red teaming, or hacking of AI systems, the problems I see a lot are day-to-day things such as I built my software and has some weaknesses. I got vulnerabilities. I care about these vulnerabilities. I need to fix them. How do I find them in the first place?
You probably noticed, for anybody who's watching, at least I've noticed, I've been smiling and kind of chuckling a little bit as you've been saying this, because I'm guilty of all of these things. I've done every one of these things. Well, I should clarify, I haven't actually injected code, but I've played with the concept. I understand that piece. But I've absolutely been interrogating these systems. I've gotten them to compare themselves to each other. I've gotten a lot of maybe it's inside information. I don't know what they're designed to give away or not, but they'll tell you, all of these AI platforms will tell you how they're designed, how they work against others. I've done compare and contrast. I've asked them to compare themselves to others in different use cases. They'll also do some really good competitive analysis on other companies, not related to themselves, pick an industry, which makes me wonder how much of that was data that was leaked that shouldn't have gotten to this to begin with. So if you want to do some competitive analysis, like some of these platforms are good for it, but then again, I also can't fact check all of it. So maybe some of it's hallucinations, which is a challenge to work through.
And again, in security, it's only a problem if I define not to do this, which is the ability for an AI model to generate code is not a problem, unless I said it shouldn't do this in the first place. And
Right.
And if a model can generate code and this AI cannot talk to a Python compiler, it's not a vulnerability application. If a Python compiler does exist and generate code, then it is a problem in that system. So the ability for a model to say, yes, I can generate code, I can do SQL instructions, only really matters in the application if there's a direct way of actually exploiting the system itself.
Right. And unfortunately, like a lot of things, like nuclear technology, for instance, to pick something on a side note, a lot of technologies can be used for peace or for negative consequences, right? And the AI doesn't know the difference. Like SQL injection has valid reasons, right? There are valid uses for a lot of things that are also used for malicious cause, and so you can talk to these systems and get them to create things for you, or you can work around the obvious if you have to, the overt, to start giving you the answers. It'll give you some malicious payloads and it'll build some things for you because it doesn't know what's malicious and what's not. It's not designed to know that. It can read it. It can infer, maybe. I don't know if infer is even the right word. It certainly doesn't know, right? So you can get these technologies to do things that maybe weren't intended, but like you said, they weren't not intended. They weren't designed out. And another interesting piece, you talked about the dependencies on being able to create something consistently with these technologies, and consistency is a big issue. So I've been playing with these for a bit now. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm getting a crash course. I'm definitely drinking out of a fire hose right now, but I've played with several of these platforms. Been trying to build custom bots and figure some things out. And I had some bots that were doing things really well for me and in a very consistent fashion. And then one day, nothing worked anymore. This happened to be with, well, I won't name the platform, I'm not calling anybody out, but one of the specific main platforms that people know well, and nothing was working anymore. And so I had to start interrogating my own bot to find out why. You have these instructions, why are you no longer following instructions? Oh, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm going to follow it now. And then we do the same thing over and over again. And finally, I'm like, stop apologizing. Let's dig into the details. Like, you have to really talk and interrogate. And finally, it kicked up that, the platform had an update. The developer, the owner of the materials, right, the developing company, made a change. And the AI bot now told me, despite your instructions, am I telling you I'm going to follow your instructions? I'm no longer going to follow your instructions because this has happened. And I couldn't override it either. They had to change the platform, and it had just basically wiped out all the productivity I was getting out of this specific tool, which, minor, not a big deal. And I can work through with these things. But I worried about it. I saw the massive possibilities. Again, we're seeing companies that are offloading people in exchange for AI. They've decided we have the efficiency advantages, we can do this. The dependency that goes along with that, and we're dependent on providers who have software that we can't analyze, that we can't understand, that we can't control, and that they don't give you a normal product update. This wasn't like any other platform I ever worked with where you get told, hey, on Monday we're gonna have a product update and this is what's going to be there and you can opt out if you want. There was none of that. I was using a piece of equipment well, and the next day I couldn't anymore. And that was it. Thankfully, I don't have a huge dependency on this. If I did, I could have had a huge business issue. And there's a business risk I don't know if people are quantifying or even recognizing exists when you start relying on technologies you don't understand and are beholden to companies who are still working through their process and making changes as they go along that completely break some of the things that people are building.
Yeah, as mentioned before, people are testing out different type of industries, the use of new AI, and some will stick and be super valuable, others will not. I've seen them both. The ones that do stick, the way they're building them something, sometimes they're not following what I would say is established thinking or lessons of security for the last few decades in this space. And they cause a whole bunch of problems for doing so, just kind of circumventing the entire process, which is why security teams are now starting to say, I'm going to block this project until you actually can tell me what's wrong with it. And so that's the best case. The worst case is do what you want, and guess what? It burns, because how many times have we heard every quarter someone puts an AI online, guess what? You take it off a week immediately after this because it leaks a whole bunch of, I think there was a company, I don't know who it is, that leaked a whole bunch of healthcare data. They had an AI agent. Absolutely everything went out of the system. And again, I don't want to go into they haven't told us what happened necessarily yet, but again, classic security problem, you would think with that personal data that's healthcare, you would make sure it is incredibly locked and key. But the problem with AI startups is that you're meant to, from week one, get this thing long and get massive traction in that space. Again, kind of thinking about security as an afterthought. So kind of, I won't say the antithesis of a startup. The startups and AI move quickly and try to get things traction quickly. Security is typically sometimes seen as this is a blocker for them. And also they don't have the budget to look at security risks. But again, increasingly in that case, big companies in a really
I mean, startups are all about move fast, break things, right? It's not really designed to be a security model. Move fast, break things, get funding, and unfortunately, a lot of these things, once they're there, good luck getting it back. You know, if that material's gotten into the LLM, or we see that a lot with IP, whether it's artists IP, I've seen physical art or music or things like that, or company IP. Once these things leak out and become part of the system, they train on these things. That's gone. Like, I don't know. I've yet to see, and you'll know, you're the expert, but I've yet to see anybody be able to say, oh, we were able to pull that data back out of the model and assure you that your IP is no longer part of this model, and have anybody be able to believe it. I mean, I couldn't trust him if he said so, because again, I can't analyze your database to understand, do you have my IP within your database now? But I can ask your AI and probably get it tooled out of there at some point if I ask the right questions, and I'll probably find out if it's hidden in your materials. And then what do I do? What's the recourse to get it back, right?
So there is there is research code called machine learning, which tries to deprioritize or remove certain data points in training data. So that is a whole field of research.
I'm very interested in that. We'll have to come back to that one. I'll have to be back on the show. I'd love to talk about machine unlearning. That's a fascinating concept, because I hadn't thought about it. I'm glad somebody's working.
And even another one, which is there's something called mechanistic interpretability, which is trying to give explainability to what is the neuron actually doing. So networks a bunch of weights and edges and activation functions. They're trying to map explaining why did we come to that conclusion. Again, there's a whole big research on this. Again, the important thing about AI security as a field is, like AI, it's not a solved problem. It changes every. So when I was flying to the RSA conference, I think 2 models dropped and the guardrail came out in that duration of that flight. And that happens every single week. So if you have a technology that is essentially quicksand in terms of it keeps changing, how on earth I'm going to have security controls and risk mitigation in place where I keep swapping things out constantly? The answer is you wouldn't, unless you very clearly say, here's my use case, here's the components I have. I test these things meaningfully. I have a good understanding of the coverage of the risks I care about. Now go into production.
Yeah, but nobody's doing that because the speed is more important than the security, because that's where the funding is.
Yeah, I mean, and some people are because they've been burnt before. They have been burnt, or the security team is saying, "Oh, I can get ahead of this very, very quickly because if I don't do this, I can see the problems immediately." Well, they can see the problems immediately, saying, "You give me software I cannot test, I cannot report, and I cannot triage any problems in it." So they say, "Sure," and they say, "Okay, I can see them."
All right. So listen, we talked a lot about, we talked about the history. We've talked about a lot of the current problems here and some concerns. Let's see if there's any positivity that comes out of the back end of this. What do you have for recommendations? What do we do to protect the integrity of AI and frankly, protect society in general? Yeah. Just a small, easy, lightweight question for you.
Where is your, sure. I think in some ways it is quite, I would say, so the difference between easy and simple in this case. I think an easy way of thinking about this is treat your AI like any other software. When a new tech comes out, you need to identify where are the gaps in terms of your current controls and your current playbooks, training and tools. Figure out where those edges are and then basically update it, which is if I'm thinking of adopting AI as a use case, I think, okay, let's place the word AI where I have an application coming in. What I normally do, I have a vendor onboarding. Is it a vendor? Is it onboarding? Can they evidence to me their compliance? Can they evidence to me they've done testing that I can interrogate? If I'm done an application, is the use case, the requirements well defined? Do they have a plan of actual, like in this case, testing in development and post-development? Do they have a playbook defined? Do they have a plate and all these other things that you normally find soft? Do I have gates? So I have security controls in place? If you actually do this, you'll probably cut down the uncertainty of a lot of the risk in AI. And actually, this is the same as X. Great. But in a lot of cases, you'll say, actually, this thing has, I understand conceptually, but I'm missing a tool. Okay, I need a tool to do testing. Okay, but AI specifically, great. Well, I need a way to block these things. Well, my current firewall doesn't work. Let's get a firewall that looks at things specifically. But I need to make sure the firewall is configured for my use case in this case. So on one hand, in terms of the day-to-day stuff, it's new technology. But it's software still. Just every new technology came out, just update your current controls, find the gaps, and then educate yourself, get new tooling, or actually, get new type of practices in place to do so. What I wouldn't recommend is having a parallel stream for AI only versus non-software, because actually these two things are complements. So actually put in place, you'll get much further than trying to do parallel. The societal issues are a big one, because you're now transcending beyond security and risk to actually societal. And in some cases, there's no right or wrong answer, actually. It's different. In technology, rapid change. So go back 120 years, 150 years, a common job was like rat catching and lighting candles. Bad stuff. And I don't know how many rat catchers people light candles in the streets.
I don't know any rat catchers, no.
Exactly. Innovation comes out, your jobs get displaced. The difference now is every time technology comes out, the speed of this thing occurs is much faster. Again, just take a step back. So let's talk about security for a second. The attacks we do in computing systems now are no different from what we did 1,000, 2,000 years ago. So if I'm a nation state, I hire a spy to go around villages saying, hey, I heard so-and-so did this, I heard so-and-so did this, to go around basically trying to cite a riot. Often in history.
Sure.
Now with AI, it is the same thing, or you can use it to do the same thing. The difference now is that it can do it at lightning speed. It can be a laser precision that looks at the profile of the individual, that targets them, but also does it so quickly it's hard to keep up. So what we've done is refine what we've already done for many, many, many years to make it much, much quicker. So put out in the case of AI risk and AI security is the same principle, which is we're now living in a world where we're still doing the stuff we've done for many, many, many years in cybersecurity, but now it's at massive scale, it's lightning quick, and it's very, very precise depending on, I say, a demographic or a data point in terms of, for example, if I know this is a chatbot public facing, I can take some guesses and build an attack that's specific to the organization. I can build that thing and get it running. You have problems of the quality, like you mentioned, in terms of the participant ones, but those tools will get more mature over time. There's a question of how do you respond quickly to things we've done many years, and how do you actually automate these practices? But to back to your point with AI, you get so very far just thinking it's not magic, it's still software. I should treat it like software. If I find gaps, and then think about, okay, how do I actually address this?
Well, I mean, you're right in a couple of things. Obviously, you said. I mean, all the things you said are correct, but a couple of things resonated in that. This is technology, right? Again, we don't have rat catchers anymore. We don't have buggy whips. Technology moves us forward. Old careers go away. New careers exist as a result. We've all seen that, right? There were no computer programmers 300 years ago. That's a rather significant industry that exists. But I don't remember a technology that had the potential to eliminate so many industries, so many jobs at the same time, right? I mean, I don't know what took out rat catchers, to be honest with you. I'll use buggy whips, though. We know the automobile, pretty much ended the buggy whip industry. But the automobile did not end the journalist industry. It did not end, I could pick up a bunch of others, but I can't think right now, I guess. It didn't end music industry. It didn't end a lot of other industries, right? It changed transportation, but it didn't end other industries, right? This seems like the kind of technology that's going to have massive impact across a lot of industries simultaneously. Again, tied to the fact that, in a capitalist structure, there's a real motivation to make that happen. Companies will say, listen, it's not my job to make jobs. It's the government's job to make jobs. It's my job to make money. It's my job to eliminate jobs if I have to make more money, because that's how it works. And this system seems designed to help make that happen very, very rapidly, much faster than we've seen other technologies do it. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of transition in place for what are we going to do with the people who aren't going to have these jobs? Because, some of the things that these systems are designed for, they are very efficient at right now. Like I said, translation, for instance. We're not far away from not needing human translators anymore, I would assume, for much of anything. And that's a career field that exists. This is very good at translating language. We're not going to be far away from having a whole lot of mathematics be unnecessary any longer, I think, beyond just what you can get with a calculator, for instance. Maybe computer programming, maybe some of the code writing, a big chunk of that may well go away. Those are pretty significant technical industries that used to take you years to learn how to master, and therefore gave you a decent career path, and they're all going to be gone. And it doesn't look like there's a lot of plan in place for what are we going to do with all those people? This isn't just saying, hey, we're going to have kiosks that are going to automate McDonald's. We're not going to have people in the registers anymore. That's unfortunate. And there's a lot of retail doing that, by the way, but that's not the same as this. Like these seem to be much more significant positions, higher paying career fields that look like they're on the verge of possibly being threatened away, again, prematurely by a system that isn't designed to do all these things yet, but an an economic system that's designed to push it forward anyway and just figure out the consequences later. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. This is a little far afield from
Sure. So I
your
guess
technical components, but it worries me for sure.
I guess two things. One is, go back to the automobile. The automobile had a very clear use case what I was trying to achieve: get to point A to point, to get to point A to point B most effectively as possible and have a time saving.
Yep.
A lot of AI technology does not have that use case in mind. What the use case of the transformer is, it can do natural language processing better. That isn't the same as get to point A to point B and actually have a very ways of measuring. It's kind of AI in many cases. It's a technology trying to find a home for a use case. The automobile. So the automobile was a bunch of combustion, a bunch of tooling, a whole bunch of things came together.
Yeah.
Had a very clear
purpose built.
Exactly, great, and that flourished. Obviously, you can argue physical machines and virtual machines different speed. So that's kind of one thing I'll say. Actually, I wouldn't worry. You should be concerned of these things, but I still come back to the AI itself will have use cases that it's very good at, others is not. I would actually challenge the translation mathematics. So on a service level, it looks like it can do. But if you go to PhD level mathematics and once you look how mathematicians think of these things, it isn't just arithmetic. It's a whole bunch of creativity that goes into problem solving, and humans are very good at some of things. AI can do some of the laborious stuff and aid them, but the actual pushing the boundaries of mathematics, I don't see replaced anytime soon because it gets incredibly conceptual building technologies. The AI itself is a supporting tool, and it can be used to do things. So, for example, I think there was a recent saying, hey, AI can do drug discovery combinations at scale, but still needs guidance to do different things. The Nobel Prize will hit AI, which is a whole different topic in that space. What meant the stuff of that stuff. But even translation, yes, it can do quite quick translation for day-to-day stuff, but a lot of translation, if I go to a courtroom and I need a translator, it isn't just the words being spoken, it's the cultural meaning. It might be the region I'm from. It might just be an emotional cadence. It might be sarcasm, for example. I don't think we're anywhere near close translation of that type of ability. Word for word, yes, but it's not going to capture a lot of the cultural, or I hate whether we use the word human, but the elements that or that context, because the AI doesn't have context of actually how to do this stuff. Will it get there? Probably at some point, but this is why I always come back to something like translational mathematics or some other activity, thinking like a tool to help accelerate those processes. Yes, that might result in some change in staff size, but also means new opportunities as well. And some things actually I think are incredibly hard to actually remove. If you do remove it, you get to the point where we talked about before, which is it's going to be let's not to labor the point philosophically about this, which is let's say tomorrow I made all LLMs and all chat GPTs not really use human language. It just basically says like a system. It says yes, no, here's the information. This doesn't say I'm foreign. It literally says very object what it did. If I had software that was doing that was not correct, I'd have bin the thing immediately. It's not helpful to me.
Absolutely.
Forget about the natural language stresses. So I think we're in that kind of situation now, which is, yes, it kind of tricks us into, yes, this thing is actually confident in what it's doing. Sometimes correct, other times completely wrong. At some point, we get to a nice symbiosis where people can understand and treat this thing into perception. And again, even going back a bit earlier on in terms of people using AI for therapy, I'm going to the street now and talk to someone, and they could be a therapist to me. They can talk to me, and they can, if I join a cult, for example, they can buy into my delusion. The problem with AI is that it can do it much quicker, much cheaper, and much more accessible than it is not in the if you go to find someone about it.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's exactly the point. I think we saw, I talk a lot about misdis and malinformation, and like I said, post-truth world I talked about earlier. And the big amplifier for that, the big leap forward was social media. It used to be, listen, every town in the world had a small niche of people who had some interesting ideas about how the world, worked, or maybe even how it was shaped, for instance. And we all just kind of chuckled and, okay, well, that's how it is. Now all those people can get together in one place, and that's social media, right? And share these stories. And so you started having a larger megaphone, a much faster message. We talk about a lie gets around the world before the truth gets its pants on. And suddenly we had millions and millions of lies. And then eventually we saw weaponization, nation state weaponization, and manipulation in elections and things like that. And now you're going to add AI to that and be able to do it. I saw some videos today that were AI generated. It's an entire car show video that's out there. And not a single thing is real. None of the people are real. None of the cars are real. None of the commentary is real. And it's fascinating and it's phenomenal. And it would be very hard to tell that this wasn't real video. And we're still kind of in the early days of AI. So, the speed and the volume of this is going to make it just incredibly difficult to keep up. I'll be interested to see who works on the AI that fights the AI, right? How are we going to do a better job of assessing what's real and what's not in a world where it's going to be so much harder? But
who guards the guards in that case? Actually, a lot of people are using AI to defend, and guess what? It's super easy to break. I do it on a day-to-day basis. So we disclosed to a bunch of the tech vendors, they put a firewall in place, we broke in 10 minutes. Super easy to do so. So again, the thing about
AI, good to know.
The thing about it's still software, it's easy to break. If you are building or using AI, take a step back and say, do I understand the risks of using it? Do I have ways to evidence those risks? If I don't, I should probably call someone up and try to get a handle on this.
Well, and here's the last bit before we close out that I was going to ask, because you talked about, I mentioned mathematics and translation. You made some good points that, it can't handle the higher level, the creative portions of mathematics. And so there's a good piece to that. And it's true of a lot of things. I talk about this in intelligence a lot. And I keep hearing people say, well, yeah, we're not going to replace your senior folks, but we're going to replace all the junior people, all the entry-level people, all the junior people. And my question has been, well, where are you going to get your next senior people from then? If you're going to replace all the entry-level people and, maybe then your mids, I'm not going to live to be 200 doing what I do. The best mathematicians in the world won't live forever. So where does the future come from? If you're not willing to let people learn and be in these lower levels and pay them to be in these lower levels, which I believe is what it comes down to. Some of it's efficiency, but a lot of it's just money. Then what happens next? Are we counting on the AIs that take over these junior entry-level positions are going to grow and advance and going to get to the point of creativity? Or are we just going to run out of creativity at some point, run out of creative ideas and mathematics and science and arts and all those things because we just turned it all over to the AI world and it can only go so far?
So this is something I talk about in my professor job, not my Mindgard company job, a lot about implications of the use of AI education, what was all training, what we're talking about. So the thing I say to most people is it's different than not wrong, if that makes sense. It's a different way of looking at it, which is we have a whole generation now growing up. A whole generation of people grew up with internet compared to people beforehand who adopted it. People growing up with social media, they've adopted it. People now growing up with AI actually being pretty pervasive in that stakes. And we're starting to see in terms of the rules of plagiarism and the rules, how do we assess education, how do we assess training and success. I think due to lack of maturity of the adoption of AI, it's kind of all over the place. But I can envision a future whereby the way you think about education is different, which is normally education is I would start from scratch. Because it goes back to my analogy of building software from the bottom of the top down, which is I start from basic principles and I can build my scaffolding up, and then I have reference points. Now we already have this capability of the calculator equivalent of the information, and then how do I best interpret this? That's the best situation. How do I use it to interpret myself, as opposed to it being a linchpin, so I just talk to it and I don't think about it much. I'm not saying that's the wrong approach, because if the type of rote memorization, and this is going into different. This is a mass memorization because different countries have different things, but I talk about the UK specifically. Rote memorization used to be much more popular 100 years ago than it is nowadays. That was that was the philosophy of education. Now, due to just research in this space, but also technology, there is more emphasis now on other types of education thinking, which is actually concept of problem solving, conceptualization. You could argue with the AI that it got rid of the memorization angle because it's not needed anymore. Equivalent of how people can read maps nowadays. So I can read a map because I had to go up and read it. And actually,
I can too. Yeah.
And it made me train other type of thinking and spatial recognition. But if I never had to use that, doesn't mean I'm not smart. It just means I'm using it for other type of education. So going back to your point, I see a future where, in the best way, you see how the AI should be augmented my learning. I mean, not emphasizing other types of things. But right now, we're in a weird situation where you're right, which is, I'll give you an example of coding. Coding before LLM ChatGPT, a lot of it would have been, okay, I tried it, it didn't work. I might go Stack Overflow and try to figure out the answer. If it's not there, what do I do? I need to actually sit down and try and do this thing. That happened quite often for many of my students. Now, with the AI, it's already there to solve for me. The worry people have is that at some point you'll come across problems that AI actually does not know. And you may not have insufficient training to stretch your intellectual muscles to say, okay, how do I handle uncertainty at a scale that I built this to the ground up again? I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's quite different. So if you're entering the workforce now, it's a different way of education, and how do we reflect that is going to be quite different, I would say. Not good or bad, but I think the medium will be, okay, how can we best use AI to augment my capabilities through training? It isn't just rely on this thing. but also maturity by thinking, okay, I see it as a tool, or I see it as a companion, I see it as a way to augment my capabilities, so I can actually use my learning process and my learning tools to do this. Right now, we're in a clash between old style education and the rise technology that kind of orphans a lot of that training itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think it's interesting. Like I feel encouraged talking to you about it, obviously. Like, and part of that I'm sure is because you've got a commercial aspect to it, but also the academic aspect. Like you've got obviously a deeper knowledge of AI than I do. I mean, let's be clear. But I do feel encouraged by it, and I have some conversations where I'm less encouraged and some where I'm more. So I hope that more people in industry are thinking the way you are. Frankly, my biggest fear is not the AI; it's the economic pressures to make the AI everything before it's ready and before it's fully baked and before people have had all these security questions answered and before there's companies in place to do the interrogation of the LLMs and of the data models and all the data that's behind it to make sure that we're not being poisoned and we're not being set up to be overly reliant on systems that aren't what we think they are, basically. So listen, we got to close up here. I got I'm a little behind because it's been a very interesting discussion, and that's fine. Maybe we'll edit some out, maybe we won't. But I do want to get to the closing question here. The name of the show is Unspoken Security. And with that in mind, tell me something you've never told anyone before, something unspoken. And it means you can't have told AI either. So it's got to be something that you haven't told anybody, including AI. I can't go look this up in one of the AI models.
Sure. Yeah. And again, if using AI, guess what your data is actually in the organization, by the way. That's not. So, I'm pretty transparent with this. So maybe one thing that I wouldn't typically tell people is not relevant is, again, this is very UK-centric. I'm trying to think of the comparison in the US. So I'm a university professor. I'm a scientist. I love being innovation. I don't have the equivalent of like a full high school diploma in the equivalent of the US, if that makes sense. Just through where I grew up, wasn't necessarily the best location. Let's say at the very, very least.
Okay.
I really got into this type of learning when I was actually a little bit, I was like 16, 17. I realized I checked a lot of stuff, like environment-wise. Why, even in my own students, my researchers, you don't need to be smart to be a scientist. That helps. There's actually a lot of other skills that are super important. That's true for any type of job in the space. It's like ideas of being kind, having perseverance, and the ability to learn. That stuff is by far much important. Education formally depends on what you do, but about it. So I do think about what would happen if I did grow up, have that sort of thing. But I think people would be quite shocked by saying, you're a professor though in this space. You have a great background in academia. You write all these research papers. I say, yes. But when I grew up, that was not the primary focus, if that makes sense. And again, a lot of it in the US in terms of where you grew up in certain areas in the country or maybe certain regions. So the environment is not a country use them as they should do, which is why part of my job is actually trying to catch people who, especially your first generation to university, to say, actually, you do belong here. Or if you're not university, actually, you can actually learn this stuff. You don't need to lay it on your back.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's one of the better ones I've gotten on this show, to be honest with you. I think I obviously would not have thought to myself, I mean, he's a doctor. He's got a PhD. Clearly, he's well educated. I guess the closest equivalent I could think of in the U.S. would be, well, I'm an example, although I don't have the academic stature you do. I have a GED. I don't have a high school diploma. I didn't graduate high school. I was thrown out my senior year. I eventually got a GED, which is the equivalency test. Since went on and got associates, a bachelor's, a master's. And I've met a few other people in our industry that have similar paths because of any number of reasons that can, derail your education when you're young, or you derail yourself because you just don't care enough, like me. But I think that might be the closest thing it sounds like from what you're talking about. And, like you said, it just shows there's different paths to get places. It's about aptitude and attitude and, drive and determination more than, there's no one specific path. Some people have easier, I don't want to say easier, but different, more traditional paths, I'll say.
Don't get me wrong. I love education. I'm always learning stuff now, but it wasn't until I was a little bit older that I actually the environment allowed me to do so at the time. So people who are a little bit younger listening, start doing it now. It's super exciting. But if you are maybe post high school, generally you can start today, and that's really exciting. Like every day I'm excited about learning stuff.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate it. I'm much more interested in learning now than I was when I was young, frankly. I just wasn't very excited about all of it necessarily. And as you said, I dig into stuff and learn all sorts of things. I'm crash coursing myself on AI right now, and I'm both very intrigued by it and interested, and also losing a lot of time and energy and sleep over it because you just keep learning. And as you said, it changes every day. It seems like I'm on to another thing, and I keep learning stuff. I can't keep up. I can't learn it fast enough, and it fascinates me. And that's what it draws conversations like this. So listen, I want to thank you for coming on, Peter, and taking the time. Before I let you go, we didn't talk much at all about, your company. I think you deserve a plug in here a little bit. You want to talk a little bit about, about Mindgard and what you guys do, and where somebody can find you if they want to talk more about that as well.
I can do it very briefly. Mindgard is a company that looks at security for AI. So we do automated red teaming and pen testing of AI systems. So if you're someone who has AI or starting to build AI and you want to answer one of my vulnerabilities, come talk to us. We have a product that will help you out.
Brilliant. I appreciate it. So it's mindgard.ai. Please reach out to Peter. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on today. This is a very interesting discussion. We'll have to have you come back on. I definitely want to talk about the unlearning and machine unlearning as that comes along. I think that's very, very interesting. But again, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today, for talking about, can people hack AI and all these risks, both, from the technical standpoint and societal. I know I threw you a lot of curveballs, and I appreciate you, taking all those in stride and giving us some really strong answers. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for today. So for everybody listening or watching at home, please, if you like this, make sure you give us all the likes and the reviews and the subscriptions, and share it with other people and let the world know, so we get more people that get a chance to hear, stories like Peter's and others. If you don't like the show, then don't tell anybody. Ping me though, and maybe I'll try and see what I can do to make it better. And with that, that's going to conclude another episode of Unspoken Security.
That's a wrap for this episode of Unspoken Security. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.